The organism is a perfect vanguard, a biological scalpel designed not for conquest, but for subversion. Before the great fleets arrive, before the skies darken with myriad spores, there is the seed. It is known by many names in the scattered and terrified lexicons of the Imperium: the corpse grinder, the night ghoul, the chittering death, but its truest designation is pure strain, Genestealer. It is a pioneer and alpha form of a species engineered for the sole purpose of infiltration. It does not arrive on a world with the thunder of drop pods or the scream of orbital bombardment. It arrives in silence, a stowaway in the forgotten cargo hold of a bulk hauler, a dormant predator nestled within the hollowed-out shell of an asteroid, or a lone survivor of a space hulk's catastrophic entry into a planet's gravity well. Its purpose is singular and absolute: to plant the curse. It is a being of sublime efficiency, honed by countless cycles of planetary consumption. Its 4 powerful limbs, each tipped with diamond-hard claws, can tear through plasteel as easily as flesh. Yet it moves with a spectral grace that belies its strength. It is a creature of shadow and silence, its chameleonic carapace shifting to match the rust-streaked corridors of an underhive or the sterile gray of a manufactorum floor. But its greatest weapon is not its physical prowess. Its most terrible asset lies within a biological imperative that allows it to turn the very strengths of its prey into the instruments of their own damnation. It does not seek to slaughter the first humans it finds. It seeks to convert them. It seeks to bestow upon them a gift, a terrible and all-consuming sacrament, known as the Genestealer's kiss. This is the heart of the curse, the mechanism of a perfect betrayal. The kiss is not a simple bite or a venomous sting. It is a precise and horrifying act of genetic implantation. A fleshy tube-like ovipositor extends from the Genestealer's mouth, piercing the victim's flesh, often at the neck or another major blood vessel, and depositing a minute payload of viral DNA directly into their bloodstream. The victim is rarely killed. Death would be a mercy. Instead, they awaken later disoriented with a small, puckered scar and a profound, unnerving change in their very soul. The alien genetic material does not merely infect, it rewrites. It targets the deepest, most primal regions of the brain, seizing control of the core instincts that define a sentient being: survival, procreation, loyalty, and love. Their free will is not destroyed, but hijacked, repurposed. An irresistible hypnotic compulsion settles over them, a feeling they misinterpret as religious awe or profound affection. They come to see the creature that violated them not as a monster, but as a messiah, a parent, a god. Their life is no longer their own. It is an instrument for the propagation of the alien's lineage, a vessel to nurture the new family. Herein lies the central grimdark tragedy of the Genestealer cult. Its members are not willing agents of chaos or malicious heretics seeking to tear down the Imperium for personal gain. They are in their own minds, the blessed. They are a family bound by a love deeper and more absolute than any natural human emotion. They believe they are the enlightened few, chosen to prepare the world for the arrival of saviors from the stars, angelic beings, who will deliver them from the oppressive toil of their lives. A father who has received the kiss will willingly lead his own children to the patriarch's embrace, believing he is granting them eternal salvation. A mother will look upon her hybrid offspring with their subtly elongated skulls or unnervingly intelligent eyes and feel nothing but overwhelming adoration. They build their faith around this beautiful, terrible lie. They work, they preach, they fight, they love, and they sacrifice everything for the glorious day of ascension, the day their star gods will finally arrive. They do not and cannot comprehend that the salvation they pray for is annihilation, and the holy hymn they sing is a dinner bell for the great devourer. They are the architects of their own apocalypse, the devoted shepherds of their own flock to the slaughter. The bulk hauler known as the Emperor's Grasp groaned as it finalized its docking clamps with Stygia Primus orbital station. For 3 standard Terran months, it had been a ghost ship running on minimal power, through treacherous warp routes, its cavernous holds filled with raw adamantium ore from a mining world now lost to an orc. Wah-ai. Deep within Hold Gamma, amidst mountains of ore containers stacked high in the oppressive darkness, one crate sat apart. It was unmarked, dented, and forgotten, a clerical error in a cargo manifest logged decades ago. As the ship's artificial gravity shifted with a sickening lurch, the crate slid its corroded locking mechanism, finally surrendering to physics. With a sharp crack that was swallowed by the shuddering of the colossal vessel, the door sprang open. For a long moment, nothing emerged. Then a shadow detached itself from the deeper shadows within. It was not a sudden movement, but a fluid uncoiling, a predator waking from a long slumber. The purest-strained Genestealer unfolded itself, its purple-black carapace absorbing the faint emergency lighting. It tasted the air, its alien senses processing the chemical tang of recycled atmosphere, promethium fuel, and the distant enticing scent of living biomass. It moved with an unnerving silence, its 4 limbs carrying it across the metal decking without a single scrape. It was a phantom of chitin and muscle, slipping through the labyrinthine corridors of the ship's lower decks, its every instinct screaming that its long voyage was over. It found a maintenance conduit, a filthy tube barely wide enough for a servitor, and squeezed its biomechanical body inside. It navigated the ship's guts until it found what it was searching for, an unsealed refuse chute leading to the planet below. Without hesitation, it plunged into the darkness, a living curse falling from the heavens to the soot-choked world of Stygia Primus. It landed in a mountain of industrial waste in the deepest level of the hive city, the Underhive. The stench of chemical sludge and human misery was thick, but to the creature it smelled like a fertile garden, a perfect place to plant a seed. Rorik was a creature of routine, his life measured in the clang of the shift change bell and the ache in his spine. For 20 years he had worked the deep mines of Stygia Primus, his face permanently stained with rock dust, his hands calloused into leathery claws. He was a solid man, broad-shouldered and weary, his spirit worn down to a nub by the relentless grind. Each cycle he would descend into the suffocating dark drill rock, until his muscles screamed, and ascend back into the grime-filtered light of the Underhive for a few hours of fitful sleep and a bowl of nutrient paste that tasted of rust. Hope was a currency he could no longer afford. He had only the slow, grinding passage of time, marked by the gradual failing of his own body. Tonight the exhaustion was a physical weight. He decided to take a shortcut home through a network of decommissioned ventilation tunnels. It was forbidden, but it would cut an hour off his walk. The air in the tunnel was stale and cold, the only sound the drip of foul water and the distant rumble of the hive above. He was halfway through when a flicker of movement in the darkness made him pause. Before he could react, it was on him. A blur of impossible speed, a weight that crushed the air from his lungs, pinning him against the tunnel wall. He saw a glimpse of a monstrous alien face, a lipless maw, and multiple burning eyes. A scream caught in his throat, turning into a choked gasp. He felt a sharp, piercing pain in his neck, a violation that was both intimate and brutally surgical. Then the world dissolved into blackness. He awoke, slumped in a side passage, the reek of sump water stinging his nostrils. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He scrambled to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. He ran a trembling hand over his neck, expecting to feel a gaping wound, but found only a small, puckered scar that was strangely numb to the touch. The terror he should have felt was absent, replaced by a hollow void. As he stumbled back into the main thoroughfares of the Underhive, the void began to fill. It wasn't with fear or anger, but with a warm, spreading sensation he couldn't identify. It felt like reverence. It felt like purpose. As he looked at the teeming, miserable masses of humanity around him, he felt not kinship, but a sudden, clear sense of superiority. He had been chosen. He had been blessed. The old Rorik was a ghost. The man who now walked the Underhive was a different being, his motivations rewritten by a biological imperative he had no hope of understanding. His Hab unit, once a miserable sanctuary, now felt alien and confining. The droning sermons from the ecclesiarchy voxcasters, once a background noise, were now an irritating static. He was being called. A silent psychic song pulled him through the winding, forgotten corridors of the Hive's depths. His instincts, sharpened by the alien DNA now replicating in his cells, guided his steps. He moved with a newfound confidence, navigating the labyrinthine decay, as if he were born to it. His journey ended at a massive, derelict hydraulic pumping station, in a condemned sector, known only as the Sump. The great cog-toothed doors had been sealed for centuries, but Rorik found a collapsed maintenance tunnel that led inside. The air within was thick with the smell of stagnant water and cold iron. In the vast central chamber, surrounded by colossal silent machinery, it waited for him. The Genestealer. It sat motionless upon a throne of rusted gantries, its silhouette a study in predatory stillness. Rorik did not scream. He did not run. The sight of the creature that had attacked him filled him not with terror, but with an overwhelming sense of coming home. He fell to his knees, his head bowed in absolute devotion. This was not a monster. This was his savior, his purpose, his patriarch. His life was instantly simplified. All that mattered was the patriarch. He continued to work his shifts in the mines, but the man was a hollow shell, an automaton performing a task. His true work began after the shift bell rang. He scavenged food not for himself, but for his god. He dragged sheets of plasteel to reinforce the entrances to their new cathedral of rust. He listened to the silent commands that now echoed in his mind, carrying out the will of the brooding creature in the darkness. He was no longer Rorik the miner. He was the first servant, the first priest, the guardian of the new faith. And he was utterly content. Rorik became a strange kind of prophet. He did not preach with words, but with a quiet, unnerving certainty that drew the broken and the lost to him. He found Anya a scavenger whose gaunt frame spoke of a lifetime of hunger, and offered her a piece of bread. He found Lycus a young outcast with a withered arm and spoke to him without the usual revulsion. He saw the desperation in their eyes, the same emptiness he had once felt, and he knew they were fertile ground for the patriarch's blessing. He led them one by one into the shadows of the pumping station. They went with the cautious hope of people who had nothing left to lose. They met the patriarch, and in the terrifying moments of the kiss, their despair was burned away and replaced with the same fervent, loving devotion that now defined Rorik. A family was born not of blood, but of the sacred genetic venom that now flowed through their veins. It was Anya who was chosen to be the first vessel. The changes in her were rapid, her belly swelling with a pregnancy that defied normal human gestation. The small cult treated her as a living saint, tending to her every need, protecting her within the sanctum of the pumping station. The birth was a silent, solemn affair. The patriarch descended from its throne, a silent observer as Anya brought forth the new life. Rorik received the child, a boy they named Malin. He was small and pale, and at first glance utterly human. He cried with the lungs of a healthy infant, his tiny fists grasping at the air. But then he opened his eyes. They were a deep, fathomless violet, and they held a chilling, ancient intelligence. There was no infantile confusion in that gaze, only awareness. As Rorik held him, he felt a faint psychic touch in his mind, a connection being forged between the newborn, the patriarch, and every member of their small, secret family. Malin was the first hybrid, the perfect fusion of two species. He was the promise of their future, the living proof of their faith, and the beginning of the true infestation of Stygia Primus. The cult learned to live in two worlds. In the overworld of the Hive, they were invisible. They were the dregs of society, the faceless workers and scavengers that the administratum counted as mere numbers on a data slate. They kept their heads down, performed their menial tasks, and drew no attention. Their poverty and obscurity were the perfect camouflage. No one cared about another ragged miner, another starving scavenger, or a child with unusually piercing eyes. They were beneath notice, and in that they found their strength. Their true lives began when they descended into the sanctified darkness of the pumping station. It was their church, their home, their fortress. There they shed the masks of human drudgery and became what they truly were, a family united in a singular holy purpose. They conducted their quiet worship not with loud hymns, but with the silent communion that now linked their minds. They tended to the patriarch, their living God, who watched over them from its iron throne, its alien mind guiding their every move. And they raised Malin. The boy was the center of their world. He grew at an accelerated rate, his mind absorbing information with terrifying speed. Lycus taught him to read from scavenged Imperial primers, while Anya taught him the geography of the Underhive's tunnels. But his real lessons came directly from the Patriarch's psychic whispers that taught him the history of the stars, the hunger of the great Devanerer, and the glorious purpose for which he had been born. He was their prince, their messiah in waiting. The secret of his nature and of the Patriarch's existence was the core of their faith. It was a secret they would kill to protect, a truth they would die to uphold. Time in the Underhive moves like dripping sludge, and 2 decades passed. The cult grew slowly, quietly, like a patient mold spreading in the dark. Malin was a man now. The alien intelligence in his eyes had softened, hidden behind a mask of calm charisma that he wore with practiced ease. He moved through the Underhive not as an outcast, but as a respected voice. A man whose quiet words could quell disputes, and whose insights into the Hive's treacherous politics were uncanny. He took a partner, a woman named Lyra, a weaver from a lower-level Hab block. She was not of the family, but she was drawn to his quiet strength, the sense of purpose that radiated from him. Malin did not have to trick her. She followed him willingly into the shadows of the old pumping station, and when she met the silent patriarch, she felt not fear, but the same sense of awe and belonging that had claimed his father. She received the kiss as a holy sacrament. Their union bore fruit. Their child was a daughter, Ilara. Her birth was a cause for celebration throughout the growing cult. She was the 2nd generation of hybrids born on this world, a sign that their family was taking root. She was a beautiful child, but she carried the sacred mark of their lineage. Tucked beneath her left arm, small and perfectly formed, was a 3rd arm ending in a delicate, 2-fingered hand. To an outsider, it would have been a hideous mutation, a brand of heresy to be purged with fire. To the cult, it was a mark of divine grace, a symbol of her closeness to their 4-armed emperor. They swaddled her in heavy robes, hiding the sign of her divinity from the profane world. Ilara was not just a child. She was a living icon, the future of their faith made flesh. Ilara grew into a woman whose presence was hypnotic. Where her father Malin commanded respect through quiet logic, Ilara commanded devotion with a glance. The psychic link that all hybrids shared with the Patriarch was exceptionally strong, in her manifesting as a captivating aura that drew people in. She became the cult's first true orator, her voice a mesmerizing instrument that could soothe a mob or inspire righteous fury. Standing on makeshift daces in secret gatherings, she began to weave the cult's theology. She never spoke of Genestealers or alien gods. Instead, she took the familiar tenets of the Imperial Creed and twisted them into a new and potent shape. She spoke of the toil and misery of the Underhive, of the distant, uncaring emperor on his golden throne. Then she would offer them a new hope, a closer, more personal God. A 4-armed emperor who lived among them, who felt their suffering and whose love was a tangible blessing. The coming saviors were not the vengeful angels of the ecclesiarchy, but star gods, benevolent beings of light, who would descend to lift the faithful from their chains and grant them a place in a heavenly paradise. This twisted gospel was intoxicating to the downtrodden. It gave their suffering meaning and their lives a glorious purpose. The cult began to swell, attracting dozens, then hundreds of new converts drawn in by the power of Ilara's words, their hearts and minds prepared for the eventual inevitable kiss. With the cult's numbers growing, Malin initiated the next phase of the great plan. Faith alone would not deliver them. They needed power. Under his quiet and methodical direction, the cultists began to infiltrate the core institutions of the Underhive. They were patient, disciplined, and utterly loyal to one another, traits that made them exemplary workers and gangers. Brothers and sisters of the cult joined the miners' guilds, the sump workers' unions, the water purification crews, and the local gangs that controlled the black market trade routes. They did not try to seize control overnight. They simply worked harder, complained less, and showed more solidarity than anyone else. A cultist miner would always share his rations with a struggling comrade. A cultist ganger would be the first to charge into a firefight. This earned them trust and respect. Slowly, methodically, they were elected to low-level leadership positions: shift foreman, guild representative, gang lieutenant. From these positions, they could steer the organizations from within, recruiting the most promising members, misdirecting tithes and resources into the cult's coffers, and ensuring that any official oversight from the upper hive was met with a wall of silence and obfuscation. The cult was no longer just a hidden church. It was becoming a shadow state, its tendrils wrapping around the very pillars of Underhive society. Ilara, now the revered magus of the faith, bore a son. His name was Voss. He was the third generation, and in him the alien bloodline expressed itself more forcefully. His skin had a faint grayish pallor, and his skull was subtly elongated beneath his hair. His movements were unnervingly quick, his eyes possessing a predatory focus that was absent in the more human-like Malin and Ilara. Voss was not born to be a preacher or a politician. His hands, even as a child, seemed designed to grip a blade. He represented the cult's shift from a phase of quiet infiltration to one of preparation for open conflict. While Ilara was the soul of the cult, and Malin was its mind, Voss was destined to become its avenging sword. He was a neophyte hybrid, a born warrior, and his birth was celebrated not with quiet prayers, but with the sharpening of knives and the chanting of battle hymns in the darkness of their sanctum. The time for whispers was passing. The time for war was drawing near. Voss came of age in the brutal crucible of the Underhive. He was raised on Ilara's sermons of holy war and trained in the arts of killing by the most vicious gangers the cult had absorbed. His true master, however, was the Patriarch, its psychic commands honing his instincts into a razor's edge. He was a prodigy of violence. By the time he was 16, he was given command of the neophyte cadres squads of third and fourth generation hybrids who shared his warrior nature. They were a clandestine army, faster, stronger, and psychically linked, allowing them to fight with a coordination that was terrifying to behold. Their first test came when the Corpse Grinder Kings, a powerful gang controlling the illicit Promethium trade, tried to seize a ventilation shaft the cult used as a primary smuggling route. The Kings sent 24 of their best killers armed with autoguns and chain choppers. Voss met them in the tunnels with only 10 neophytes. The fight was a massacre. The cultists moved through the darkness like ghosts, their unnerving silence broken only by the crack of autoguns and the wet sound of rending claws. The Corpse Grinder Kings were annihilated without a single loss to the cult. Soon after, when a junior officer of the Adeptus Arbites began an investigation into the unusual number of disappearances in the cult's territory, he was found at the bottom of a sump shaft, his throat cut. The case was ruled as just another unsolved hive crime. Voss and his neophytes were the bloody hands of the cult, purging any threat and securing their growing dominion through swift, merciless violence. The cult's influence over the mining guilds now began to yield its most critical dividend, the tools of rebellion. Under Mylan's careful logistical planning, a river of industrial equipment began to flow into the cult's hidden armories. A seismic charge recorded in the guild ledgers as lost in a tunnel collapse would reappear in a workshop to be converted into a powerful breaching explosive. A heavy-duty rock laser officially decommissioned due to a faulty power cell would be mounted onto a cargo hauler, turning the civilian vehicle into a makeshift assault tank. Ripping claws used for pulverizing rock were welded onto armored plates and given to the hybrid shock troops, transforming them into monstrous close-quarters behemoths. The cultists were masters of improvisation, their fanaticism fueling their ingenuity. They were not just building an arsenal, they were consecrating their tools of labor into instruments of holy war, each stolen drill and reforged cutter a sacrament for the bloody work of the coming day of ascension. As the cult grew into a complex, multifaceted organization, its leadership structure evolved. The weight of prophecy and spiritual guidance settled fully upon Ilara. Her psychic connection deepened, and she began to receive fleeting, powerful visions, not just from the patriarch in his sanctum, but from a vast, cold consciousness in the void between stars. She became the Magus, the High Priestess, whose every word was taken as the will of the star gods. Her son Voss was her unquestioning champion, the Clamavus, who would call the masses to war. But to wage a war, they needed a general. That role fell to another third-generation hybrid named Korgan. Where Voss was a whirlwind of instinctual violence, Korgan possessed a cold, calculating intellect. He was a natural strategist, able to see the intricate web of the hive's infrastructure and logistics as a battlefield. He was elevated to the rank of Primus, the supreme commander of the cult's armed forces. The triad of leadership was now complete: Ilara the Magus, the voice of the gods; Korgan the Primus, the mind of the war; and Voss the bloody sword that would execute their will. The great cycle. The sacred purpose of their species was nearing its zenith. The third generation gave rise to the fourth, and with them the cult's potential became twofold. Many of the children were born almost indistinguishable from humans. Their alien traits were recessed, hidden deep in their genetics, making them the perfect infiltrators, able to move beyond the underhive and take up positions in the spire-top bureaucracy or the planetary defense force itself. But some births were different. Some were hailed as the greatest of miracles. In a secluded chamber attended only by the Magus and the Patriarch, a fourth-generation mother would give birth not to a hybrid, but to a pure-strain Genestealer, a perfect, unblemished replica of the very creature that had first blessed Rorik decades ago. The cultists wept with joy at the sight of these angels. They were not raised on Stygia Primus. The cult's smuggling network, now vast and efficient, had a new holy purpose. These new pure-strains were sealed into stasis pods, marked as industrial machine parts or biological samples, and loaded onto outbound freighters. The curse of Stygia Primus was now seeding itself across the stars, the divine family extending its loving embrace to new, unsuspecting worlds. In the unimaginable silent emptiness between star systems, the consciousness known as the hive mind perceived a change in the cosmic tapestry. It was not a thought, for the hive mind does not think as mortals do. It was a stimulus, a sensation akin to a scent on the wind. For millennia, the sector containing Stygia Primus had been a blank spot, a region of inert matter and unrealized potential. Now, a pinprick of light shone in the psychic spectrum. It was a beacon, a focused psychic signal composed of the Patriarch's powerful summons, and amplified 1,000-fold by the worship and belief of its followers. The signal was a complex one, carrying with it echoes of devotion, longing, and a readiness for battle. To the hive mind, These nuances were irrelevant. It stripped the signal down to its bare biological meaning. A world had been seeded, the vanguard organism had succeeded, the native biomass had been subverted and prepared for consumption. The harvest was ready. A tendril of hive fleet kraken, a monstrous shadow of living ships miles long, began a slow, silent, and utterly inexorable course correction. The great devourer did not rush. It had all the time in the universe. It was simply on its way to dinner. The first touch of the hive mind's psychic shadow upon Stygia Primus was felt by the Magus Ilara. She was in the midst of a sermon before hundreds of the faithful, her voice echoing through a vast underground cavern. In the middle of a sentence, her eyes rolled back in her head and she collapsed. The cultists gasped, rushing to her side. But she was not dead. Her body convulsed on the cavern floor as a vision of overwhelming power flooded her mind. She did not see the reality of the hive fleet, the chitinous horrors, the mindless eating machines, the absolute biological nightmare that was approaching. Her mind, shielded by a lifetime of faith, interpreted the raw psychic signal as a divine revelation. She saw fleets of silver ships crewed by beings of pure light. She saw winged angels with flaming swords descending to purge the wicked non-believers. She saw a paradise of light and peace, the ultimate reward for their generations of struggle. She awoke with a piercing scream of pure, unadulterated joy. Staggering to her feet, her eyes blazing with psychic energy, she raised her arms and proclaimed the final glorious truth. They are coming, I have seen them, the star gods are coming. Prepare yourselves for the day of ascension. Our paradise is at hand. A single deafening roar of ecstatic belief erupted from the crowd. The final phase had begun. Their holy war was about to be unleashed. As the first bioships of the Hive fleet pierced the Mandeville Point and entered the Stygia system, a silent bomb detonated. It was a psychic shockwave of unimaginable force, a pressure wave of pure despair and terror that washed over the planet. For the uninitiated masses of Stygia Primus, the effect was catastrophic. A planetary malaise descended in an instant. In the upper spires, nobles were overcome with a sudden, crushing paranoia, turning on their bodyguards and family members. In the manufactorums, workers were seized by violent, bloody visions, causing machinery to malfunction with horrific results. Across the planet, billions were plunged into a state of nameless dread, their nightmares leaking into their waking hours. The planet's astropaths were the first to die, their minds turning to molten ruin as they screamed a final incoherent warning. The entire world was sickened, its collective spirit gripped by a cold and profound fear of a doom it could not see. For the members of the cult, however, this psychic scream was a symphony. The shadow in the warp, a suffocating blanket of horror for others, was to them the warm, embracing presence of their gods. The dread that crippled their neighbors was for them an ecstatic, overwhelming sense of imminence. It was the final confirmation, the ultimate validation of their faith. Their minds, long attuned to the Patriarch's psychic resonance, received the signal not as a threat, but as a divine chorus, a call to arms that filled them with rapturous energy and absolute certainty. Deep in the rusted sanctum of the pumping station, the Patriarch, the original seed of the curse, stirred from its long stillness. For the first time in generations, it threw back its head and unleashed a physical roar, a shriek of chitin and alien hunger that was broadcast psychically to every one of its children across the planet. The Great Awakening was over. The time had come. The Patriarch's cry was the signal. In a single coordinated instant, Stygia Primus tore itself apart. The uprising was not a riot. It was a planet-wide military coup, executed with terrifying precision. From the deepest sump drains, sewer grates were blasted from their hinges as squads of neophyte hybrids, armed with autoguns and rending claws, swarmed into the underhive's thoroughfares. In the mines, the night shift turned their industrial tools on their foremen, the high-intensity beams of laser drills carving through flesh and armor plating. In the capital Hive, cultist infiltrators within the Planetary Defense Force turned on their comrades, detonating munition stores and seizing control of armories. The planet's communications network was the first primary target. Guided by the Primus Korgan's master plan, demolition teams planted seismic charges at the foundations of the major Vox towers, and within the first hour, Stygia Primus was deaf and blind, cut off from the rest of the Imperium. The Adeptus Arbites and the loyal PDF were caught in a whirlwind of chaos. They were prepared for riots, for gang wars, but not for this. Not for a rebellion that erupted from every level of society at once. Their enemy was the mechanic who serviced their chimeras, the mess hall server who fed them, the seemingly loyal trooper standing next to them in the shield wall. Command structures collapsed as officers were assassinated in their own headquarters. Garrisons found themselves besieged from within and without. The cult moved with the unnerving coordination of a single organism, its every action guided by the psychic network that bound them. They were a hidden disease that had festered for 4 generations, and now, in a single violent spasm, they had erupted to consume their host. By dawn, the green flags of the Planetary Defense Force were being torn down and replaced with the cult's icon, a many-limbed serpent devouring a star. From the perspective of Voss and his warriors, it was a day of divine retribution. They were not murderers. They were reapers cleansing the planet of the unbelievers to make it worthy of their coming gods. Voss himself led the assault on the Bastion of Justice, the primary precinct fortress of the Adeptus Arbites. He was a dervish of destruction, his movements a blur of gray skin and flashing steel. His repurposed mining shears, now a monstrous power weapon, tore through the precinct's adamantium doors. He and his neophytes poured into the breach, their battle cries a mixture of praise for the 4-armed emperor and promises of a glorious new dawn. They fought with a fanaticism that the Arbites, for all their grim training, could not match. The hybrids ignored wounds that would have felled a normal man, their minds and bodies driven by the ecstatic psychic chorus of the awakening. They saw the crumbling defenses of the old regime not as a tragedy, but as a righteous and necessary purge. The terrified screams of civilians were to their ears the last gasps of a corrupt and dying world. Every arbiter they cut down, every bastion they stormed, was an offering laid at the altar of their faith. Maelan, now a revered elder, directed the seizure of food and water supplies, ensuring the faithful would be provided for. Korgan the Primus orchestrated the wider battle from a captured command center, moving his forces with the cold precision of a master strategist. All across the Hive cities, the cult was victorious, their crude, improvised weapons proving more than a match for a defense force crippled by betrayal and confusion. They were winning. The world was theirs. They were paving the way for paradise with the blood of the unworthy, and it was glorious. With the capital city largely secured, the cultists poured out of the hab blocks and tunnels and into the great open plazas. 1,000,000 voices were raised in a single joyous hymn, their eyes fixed on the bruised, smoke-filled sky. They were waiting for the sign for the arrival of the star gods that the Magus Ilara had promised. Then it began. The sky darkened further and a strange organic rain began to fall. Great leathery sacks of flesh, mycelial spores, drifted down by the thousands, covering the city in a living carpet. The cultists cheered, weeping with joy. They reached out to touch the spores, believing them to be a heavenly blessing, the first touch of their saviors. The spores burst upon landing, and from them crawled the first of the angels. They were not beings of light. They were creatures of nightmare. Skittering 6-limbed hormagaunts, their bodies little more than skeletons wrapped in sinew and topped with scythe-like claws, and squat biogun-wielding termagants swarmed from the birthing sacks. Ilara, standing on a balcony overlooking the main plaza, felt a moment of stunned confusion. These were not the saviors from her vision. She reached out with her mind, ready to greet the divine consciousness of the gods, and she found only a void. A howling, mindless, all-consuming abyss of pure hunger. Before the cultists' cheers had even died in their throats, the feeding began. A termagant leveled its flesh borer and spat a stream of beetles that devoured a nearby cultist, dissolving him into a puddle of screaming gore. The Hormagaunts leaped into the crowds, their claws rising and falling, disemboweling worshipper and defender alike with shrieking impunity. The awful truth descended upon them in a wave of blood and terror. These were not saviors. They were the harvest, and the cultists were merely the first course. Voss watched from the steps of the conquered bastion as the angels began to slaughter his people. The psychic symphony in his head dissolved into a cacophony of shrieking agony. For a single frozen moment, his entire existence, his faith, his holy war, his divine purpose shattered into dust. He saw a tide of the smaller creatures swarming toward the balcony where his mother Alara stood frozen in horror. A lifetime of indoctrination was burned away by a single primal instinct: protect his family. With a roar of pure nihilistic rage, he charged. He was a god of death for a few precious seconds, his claws and shears dismembering dozens of the skittering horrors. But his rampage was cut brutally short. A shadow fell over him, and a living mountain of muscle and chitin, a carnifex, smashed through the side of a building. Its massive, scything talons plunged through Voss's chest, lifting him effortlessly from the ground. He had just enough time to meet his mother's terrified eyes before the monster tore his body in two. Alara saw her son die. She saw her flock being eaten alive by the very beings she had promised would save them. The weight of her catastrophic generation-spanning mistake crushed her mind. The salvation she had preached was nothing but a biological trap. Her family's entire history, their love, their sacrifice, was a lie to fatten the herd for the slaughter. She opened her mouth and let out one final soul-shattering scream of utter despair. It was abruptly cut off as a wave of gaunts surged over the balcony, their chittering forms a living tide that pulled her down, their claws and teeth, tearing her apart. Her salvation had arrived at last. The screams of Stygia Primus faded. The brief, chaotic frenzy of the initial landing gave way to a process of horrifying biological efficiency. The invasion was over. The consumption had begun. The sky, already choked with spores, was now blotted out by the immense shadows of the bioships that had descended into low orbit, their fleshy tendrils reaching down to the planet's surface like the roots of a star-spanning cancerous tree. From these tendrils descended monstrous organisms built for a single purpose: digestion. Great capillary towers hundreds of meters high drilled into the planet's crust, their chitinous drills glowing with geothermal heat as they began to siphon the molten heart of the world. The oceans boiled, hissing into steam as they were pumped into the fleet's waiting maws. Colossal reclamation pools were established, vast craters filled with acidic enzymes that dissolved everything: the rubble of hive cities, the mountains of the dead, the bones of heroes and cultists alike, into a thick, nutrient-rich slurry. The planet itself was being eaten alive, its every atom repurposed with a terrible silent industry. The sounds of battle were replaced by the sounds of digestion, a planetary chorus of slurping, grinding, and dissolving. Deep within the ruins of the capital hive, in the desecrated sanctum that had been its throne room for a century, the patriarch stirred. The psychic chorus that had defined its existence, the whispers of its children, the prayers of its flock, the hymns of its magus, was gone, replaced by the single overwhelming silent roar of the hive mind. Its purpose was complete. Its children had risen, they had weakened the prey, and they had dyed their biomass, now mingling in the digestion pools with that of their enemies. The patriarch felt the psychic command of its creator. It was not a call for a report, nor a summons for a victor to receive its laurels. It was the simple biological imperative to return, to be reabsorbed. It crawled from the rubble of the pumping station, a god surveying the ruins of its fallen religion. It did not have long to wait. The ground before it trembled and split apart, and a trigon, a serpentine bioform of immense size, erupted from below in a shower of rock and plasteel. The beast did not pause to acknowledge the patriarch. It saw no god, no progenitor, no fellow creature of significance. It saw only biomass. With a single swift motion, the trigon lunged forward, its cavernous maw opening to swallow the patriarch whole, extinguishing the first spark of the Stygian curse in a single, unceremonious gulp. As its consciousness dissolved in the beast's gullet, its unique genetic code and 100 years of memories were uploaded back into the collective. It was not a hero's welcome. It was an asset being efficiently recycled, and from the perspective of the hive mind, the event registered as less than a footnote. The vast galaxy-spanning intelligence does not possess consciousness, as mortals understand it. It has no concept of faith or love or betrayal or tragedy. These are fleeting, irrelevant chemical reactions within the lesser organisms it consumes. The story of the Genestealer cult of Stygia Primus. 4 generations of hope and fear, of secret births and holy wars, the love of a father for his hybrid son, the faith of a prophet in her false gods. The final agonized scream of a warrior devoured by his own salvation did not exist. The hive mind perceived the entire century-long saga as a single efficient chemical process. A vanguard organism had been successfully deployed. It had located a viable biomass source. It had subverted the native population to neutralize planetary defenses, a tactic catalogued as Infiltration Cycle 7.4.2, religious subversion. The prey had been pre-digested, softened from within, maximizing the energy yield of the final consumption. The entire epic of the Hymn of the Devoured was to the Great Devourer a simple positive entry in a biological ledger, biomass assimilation complete. Net energy gain satisfactory. The curse was not death. The curse was the horrifying absolute truth that their entire existence, their deepest passions and their ultimate sacrifices had been utterly and completely meaningless. The hive fleet, its nutrient sacks replenished, moved on, leaving Stygia Primus, a dead barren rock stripped clean of life, air, and memory. In its wake, there was only the profound and indifferent silence of the void.